Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the feedback for Pauline, for Imma, for Sam and for Hannah. I'm the first marker and Max is the second marker. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much for this. I've never had such a beautiful booklet, you know, and that is so useful. I can really keep it, go through it, you know. I thought it was a lot of work to put the transcript of the interviews, but I think it's really good to have it. So that's really great. So thank you for this document. I think you really enjoyed the presentation. Did it go as you wanted, as you planned it?
Yeah.
So you're happy with it?
Yeah.
You're smiling, and I can see a lot of fun as well, which started with the names. And I thought it was really quite inviting to start with and intriguing as well. So maybe as Max asked you, when Max asked you a question about, you know, you've got his names, you know, why?
Maybe we should have said.
Yeah, I think maybe you could have explored this a little bit more, because these are key words from the Code of Conduct. And you know, you didn't just choose them because it matched your letter, you know, the letter of your name, but you could have explored that further and say, because these are values of the Code of Conduct that you know, that are essential, you know, something like that, you know. So it's not just fun, but it also has a deeper meaning behind it. So I think that's quite important. Very good group dynamic. You work very well together. It seemed as if, you know, you all knew the whole part of the whole presentation, not just your part. It was not fragmented, but on the contrary, that was really it was a presentation that really came up as a group product, you know, which I thought was really nice. I really liked that. I thought that you gave the floor, you know, to each other very nicely. You know, that was really good as well. Good transition. Pauline, you got a huge smile, so it's really good to start with you and to finish with you, you know, and you were very dynamic, lots of energy, and I think it's really good to have this at the beginning and at the end, you know, so yeah, that's really good. You need to pay attention to a few things in English. Idea, not ID, no. An ID is a passport. Okay, idea, there's an, you know, and then you talked about, you know, there's a lack of something. I think that you meant there's a gap in the Code of Conduct, you know. So here and there were little mistakes that you've got to really try to solve, you know, try to resolve really. And that's quite important. But great smile, great level of energy. I think that was really good. In your part, which was, you know, at the end, you know, the discussion, I felt, you know, that this conclusion, which was a typical student conclusion, you know, oh, I would be the perfect interpreter, I would do this, and then I would do that, you know. So it highlighted, you know, the fact that you didn't know that in a conference things come unexpected, and you've got to, you know, but then in a discussion, you know, I think you talked a lot about that. And then the question about facilitating, that could have been a very nice conclusion as well, you know, in the end, you know, are we facilitators? I think it would have been nice for me to hear as well that maybe the EU and the UN as institutions have got certain values that are also, you know, that come also into the interpretation of the message, you know, especially the UN. We know that this is very strong, you know. But I would have liked you to also make this distinction with the European Parliament. It's a, you know, the Parliament is made of political parties. So I think it's the essence of political parties to be against each other, to bring ideas across, to fight. So it's quite different. At the UN, you know, it's quite different because you've got different states, but you know, communication goes with statements. Sometimes you have conversations with NGOs and everything, but it's not the same as such, you know, it's not the same culture. So I think making a difference between the two nature of these, you know, of these institutions, I think that would have been quite good. Okay, so Sam, really good, engaging, lots of energy, really there. You know, I really liked your delivery. You've got to be careful with this word interpreting. Yeah. The wrong syllable is stressed every time, you know. So as a key word that describes your profession, you cannot afford to make a mistake. So Hannah, please, as an English A, take Sam, lock him in a room, make him practice, and he cannot come out until he's got it. That's quite important. Okay. So that was quite good. I really like the 2 case studies. I thought that was really good. To have gone to the trouble to interview, your interpreters, and you were there at the UN as well. So that was quite good. I thought that the code of conduct, is the code of conduct. And I would have liked to hear a little bit more that, there's no choice. When you work for the international institutions, the body that regulates, but at the same time engages with the institutions on working conditions for the interpreters is AIC. There's no choice. So someone you were saying, well, a lot of top professional interpreters use AIC as a code of conduct. Not really. Here, in this setting that you chose, there's no choice. You've got to abide by the code of conduct of AIC. So I think that was quite good. On the 15th of June, we're doing a CPD that we repeated in November, and it's about, we're doing it with the NRPSI, and it's a code of conduct about ethics, and it's exactly what you're suggesting. It's case studies, reflection, together, and it does exist quite a lot for public service interpreting, but not so much for conference interpreting. And I liked what you said, Hannah, when you're saying, well, I'm going to start and I'm going to arrive. Right, I don't know much about this. Can you tell me about that? It doesn't show you in a night, in a very professional, light, in a sense. So I like the fact you were aware of this. But it's a good suggestion. That's really good. Again, who is the regulator of the profession? I would have liked you to think about this a little bit more. When you do something wrong, what are the consequences? When there's a breach of the code of conduct, who tells you off? Who complains? Is there a disciplinary procedure? Is it right that AIC, which is a professional organization, also acts as a regulator? This is not right for public service interpreting, and this is why the NRPSI is separated from the Chartered Institute of Linguists, because there was a conflict of interest. So in conference interpreting, we don't have a distinction. So I think that this could have been ideas, to move forward as well. But I think Max wants to tell you something about literature as well.
Also, yeah, and about something else as well.
Yes.
Because I have a few things to say. Actually, most of them they're positive. I agree with Danielle about group dynamics, which is why we both agreed they had to be in the outstanding grade. I felt that, for example, if at any point I had asked any of you to take over the presentation from one of the other members of the group, you would have probably been able to do that. Okay, this was definitely a group presentation. That was brilliant. And something else that Danielle possibly forgot to highlight, but maybe because it was so obvious that we took it for granted, is that your presentation was also excellent in terms of the way you planned and structured your research. It was excellent in terms of a vehicle for research presentation. Okay, so you started with someone's personal experience and interest. You provide the sort of conceptual background. You explore the code of conduct, and then you gave us two, strictly relevant, highly relevant case studies. So from the point of view of presenting research, it also worked very well. As Danielle was saying, perhaps I would like you to try and establish some links with the subject literature, because obviously this issue is directly relevant to issues that have been discussed a lot in the literature. Obviously ethics, the interpreter's role, which is what we ended up discussing at the very end of our discussion following Danielle's question. Now, this is not strictly one of the requirements, but this is not one of the assessment criteria, so this is not really playing a part in our assessment, as it were, but just as a suggestion for improvement, maybe some, very, very quick link could have helped.
We thought with Imma, we met once to talk about literature. Should we add a few authors, like authorities? But actually, we were already talking with three codes. We were 4 minutes, and actually, when you have 20 minutes, it's very short. We have other codes of conduct, for example, the Australian one, the one for the sign language too. It was way too short, 5 minutes for the codes of conduct. So we decided to just say, forget the literature. If one day we do another something else.
We realize that, yes, but also
But maybe just one or two, not many, but one or two would have been great.
I think
But
we
then-
chose the most
Maybe we could have put it in
important
there.
ones.
absolutely.
We have to do 5 minutes was like 5. So.
But there are also ways in which you can reference the literature indirectly, as it were, perhaps without explicitly referencing. You could, for example, adopt the terminology, what we sometimes call the meta-language in this context. So, for example, Sam, you discussed in a very effective way, in my opinion, something that you kept calling in slightly different ways, although all of them work very well. The professional consensus, the customary thing that interpreters do, the customary practice. Maybe the word norm there would have helped you because that's often mentioned in the literature.
Yeah.
And the effect that this has is that it lends further credibility to your presentation because people in the audience, just through hearing that terminology being used, will get the impression that you are also familiar with that literature. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That you have thought about this issue,
Yeah.
also in terms of putting it in the context of the larger, the discussion. So that's one way in which it could have helped. Also, occasionally, in using some terms, some of the terms which were your own terms, but perhaps they could have been used in a slightly more precise sense or be defined more accurately. You often mention literal approach, and okay, I think we understood from the context what you meant, but it can be a really loaded term, okay? It needs a little definition effort. The same we thought for you, Imma, often referred to something being strict, which was a bit puzzling in that context. For example, on this slide you had precise, which I already felt more happy with rather than strict. You were talking about the codes. Perhaps prescriptive could have been helpful in that kind of specific context. And also we thought offensive may have needed some further definition at the start because maybe we were thinking about something, I don't know, casually rude, whereas you had something else in mind, something quite specific and very interesting actually, more interesting than just being casually rude, so maybe it needed to be defined a bit more precisely. I thought maybe in the part you had, Imma, I'm saying this just because it was Imma's part, but it's relevant to everyone, perhaps at some point you could have asked the why question. You identify the difference very well between something like the AI code of conduct and the more prescriptive and more precise code of conduct in the ICTY. And why is that? I think if you had asked yourselves that question at that point, it would have probably helped you address directly the kind of issues which you did address in the end, and you did so very well, but you did so thanks to Danielle's question. Okay. So in the end, Danielle's question prompted a discussion where you finally, addressed that head on. You worked very well. Maybe you could have also asked why, in which case you would have probably ended up thinking that, well, this is a tribunal. There is some kind of.
We asked this question. I asked, and also all of us, we asked this question to ourselves.
Yes.
Yes. There's no
Maybe we didn't.
guideline on that, but of course, I think that since it's tribunal and for war, so it's obvious that if someone insults the person, the interpreter must convey that, must say that what the person says. So because it's a really important setting.
Yeah, I would like you to ask it with us, okay, that question. I think it's partly because in the legal domain, that's the way language is used in the legal domain means that people often have that approach to literal use of language. And partly because, and that's what we ended up addressing in the end, and I thought something did that particularly well, addressing the monologue interpreting, dialogue interpreting dichotomy. That's why it's there in the code. That's why AIC, starts with the canonical scenario being monologue interpreting. But once we are in a court setting, once we're there, then we have dialogue interpreting. And eventually, thanks to Danielle's question, you can back to that. Because you mentioned the intention of the speaker, that was really important. Again, because if you are interpreting Nigel Farage, his intention is to be offensive. So in a sense, if the interpreter is not as offensive, the interpreter has done a disservice to Nigel Farage, in a sense. You can understand the opposite argument as well. In the court, it will be different. In the court, we want to know that if the witness says that this person used this offensive person, the offensive word describing someone else, that it's an important piece of evidence. Again, the intention. So that was part of the pragmatics. Again, maybe something that could have been there with the terminology, which again, you addressed that very well, because you addressed that idea of the intention. Okay, pragmatics is not just about the intention of the speaker, but it's also about making the dialogue move forward.
Yes.
Okay, yes, you reminded us of that crucial dimension, okay? Which is why if maybe the contrast between monologue interpreting and dialogue interpreting had been there a little earlier, I think maybe we would have had all of that without Danielle's helpful question at the end, I think. But I'm quibbling here, okay? Because, I'm in a sense I'm trying to, because you made me very interested, and don't allow these remarks and to give you the impression that I have a negative, view of your presentation, when in fact my view is overwhelmingly positive. Okay.
But this is why this time I've decided to have an hour per group, so that we can have this discussion. It's so interesting, so it's not to criticize, but it's to engage into further thinking. Also, you made again a pronunciation mistake, which I thought was quite relevant, unfortunately here, because you confused hated and heated.
Heated, yeah.
Yeah, heated, and you talked about hate.
I say
And
hated.
here, hated. So here, because we're talking about, offensive, it was a little bit, so be careful with these two words, hated and heated, quite important as well. So really engaged, really engaging. As you can see, we can't stop, actually. And I would really like I would like to invite you to come to on the 15th of June to RCPD, if you haven't done the first one that we did in November with the Eventbrite link is going to be available maybe by tomorrow. Okay, so you will be able to register.
Right.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, no, hang on.
Probably need to do the remarks.
Yeah, the remarks, oh my God, sorry. 4 days of assessment, and this is what it does to you. Okay, so let me project, the marking sheet. Oh, the computer started again. Great. Oh, no, it's okay, it's fine.
It's like being at the cinema.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have the popcorn,
You don't know
sorry
what to
about that.
expect.
Okay, so as you know, you've got three categories: the content, the delivery, and the group dynamics. And we've talked extensively about each, of them. So for the first category, out of 40, I haven't got the marks here. Can you see?
It's 30. 30
out of 40. Delivery,
29.
29, and group dynamics,
17.
giving you a total of.
76.
Wow.
And so what does 76 mean? So you can see here, so you are in this category, really excellent grasp of concept or context, critical analysis was really quite good, original. Here in the literature, missing, but debates, that was quite nice as well. And advanced scholarly type, most of the time, yes, but follow, I would say, Max's advice. Okay? So great, well done,
Thank
lots
you
of
very
work,
much.
but a very good marking exchange.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
you're very welcome. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I will
Back to
send
work.
you. Yes.
We-
No, Pauline, oh, and well, I was
Stop
the
recording.
recording, yeah, that's it.
Vabbè.